Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the PE Geek Podcast. And as always, thanks heaps for tuning in. On today's episode, we're actually really fortunate to have our first ever guest on the podcast. And I have been alluding to having some guests appearing in previous episodes, but thought it was an opportune time to introduce to you Mike Vasquez, who is going to talk to us a little bit about the role that he has in the area of 3D printing and the sort of collision that has with sport. So welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for coming along. And I mean, for a little bit of background story for those people that are just tuning in, I, in March, did a blog post about how I had been playing around with 3D printers on site at my school. And I basically stumbled across the design for a 3D whistle and thought that would be a pretty cool addition to my classroom and printed it out. And it was my first ever sort of experience with 3D printers. And it basically led me to Mike and the sort of things that he's doing. So do you mind sort of sharing your background and how you're involved in this sort of world?
Absolutely. So thanks again for having me on the podcast.
You're welcome.
So a little bit about me. I'm actually based in Chicago, if not in Australia, as the accent you can hear. So I'm an engineer by background, but really passionate about sports and combining the two. So since an early age, I've really kind of my passion has been in baseball, but enjoy kind of all sports. And did my undergrad at MIT, where I was fortunate enough to see or find out that a teammate of mine on the baseball team was involved in this research group called the Sports Innovation Lab. And it was, for me, it was like a kid in the candy store. It was a place where undergrads and graduate students and professors came together to explore and work on problems in sports, with athletes, with equipment and things like that. And that was really my first introduction to really think about, like, hey, like there could actually be a career designing baseball bats or designing shoes. And like, I hadn't thought about that in the past. And like, then it kind of clicked for me. It's like, someone's got to be designing the equipment that athletes are using on the field. And like, how do I become one of those people? So really started to focus on doing some internships with sports companies, actually doing an internship globally or in the UK, outside of the US, at this university in England, about an hour north of London, called Loughborough, which is pretty well known for sports. And there I got my first introduction to the Sports Technology Institute, and kind of long story short, decided after MIT to go out there and pursue a PhD. And it was there really that I started to really focus on 3D printing and how it could be applied in sports. And what my project was on was how can you develop new materials for 3D printing? And the reason that's important is that 3D printing has been around since the 80s. So it's not kind of a new technology. It's new in the sense that for a lot of people that have heard about it as for kind of low cost or desktop or home printer. So that's a pretty new phenomenon that's come about in the recent years. But the origin of the technology is not too new, but it was really used for prototyping and just creating something that you could put in a meeting, at an engineering meeting, on a desk, and you could talk about or just handle. But it wasn't, the materials and the process wasn't sophisticated enough to really create an end product that would withstand falling off that desk or being swung like a baseball bat or something like that. So a lot of sports companies in particular, in addition to kind of the typical companies that are pushing engineering research forward, like aerospace and medical and things like that, we're really interested in, hey, like, this is an awesome technology. Can we make the materials, or can we develop materials that are even better so that we can take advantage of the design opportunities that it allows? And that, with that kind of in mind, a company called Burton Snowboards, based in the U.S. I think if not the biggest, one of the biggest snowboarding companies in the world, and we're in the early 2000s really exploring the technology, first for prototyping, and then got to the point where they wanted to do some pretty sophisticated functional parts out of 3D printed materials. So they partnered with the university to explore that. I was fortunate enough to be the person that, or one of the people that worked on that specifically, and helped them develop a process and ultimately a new material to use on snowboard binding parts and snowboard parts. We ended up testing them on the snow and get them onto real athletes and things like that. So it was really exciting. And then from there, I've been I've worked for about 2 years now in Chicago. I run my own consulting firm that helps companies of all sorts, not just sports, you better use 3D printing technology. So both in applications and in developing new materials and machines. So it's called 3D printing reports, but
Awesome.
still do a lot of stuff in sports. And the reason that sports is interesting from an kind of a research and development and even product space for me is that not many people know this, but it's actually one of the places where you see a lot of development in new technology, and they're an early adopter of many of the new materials and new processes that you would see alongside kind of defense or aerospace. And the reason for that is that they don't have the regulations that you would say an automotive company might have, or a company that makes airplanes has. So they're just making sports equipment. It's most of the time it's not life and death. So they're like the difference between half a second or a tenth of a second on a race or a run down a snowboarding course makes a huge difference. And if they're able to get that performance by using a different material that no one's ever used before, they're going to do it. And they also have the cash backing to explore that. So it's really unique in the sense that they're always pushing product out, kind of like fashion every season, but they're also really looking at what's the next material, what's the next process, what's on the horizon. So that's a really, for me at least, really exciting, where you actually get to see things that you're working on in the lab or in research being applied in products in the next season. So there's a little bit of history. Sorry if I went on for too long, but
that's good. I mean, it really
I'll stop for there.
It really paints a picture about, sport is that thing that really does drive a lot of innovation, and believe it or not, that innovation finds its way into our phys ed classrooms as well. And you talk about equipment design and so forth. Well, those things eventually end up in the hands of students in phys ed classes. And I could, you just talk about whether or not a piece of equipment ends up making something easier to use. Well, then that obviously translates into a student use as well. And that might actually be the thing that makes it possible for them to learn a skill faster than they had previously learned it. Would that be a fair sort of assumption to make, with as these progressions sort of happen, things become easier to use and skill could progress as well?
Absolutely. I think the biggest advantage that 3D printing has over traditional technologies is this ability to really make and design highly complex and highly customized objects in a way that is pretty cost effective. So comparatively, so say we're making some other plastic piece of equipment. Typically, they're going to be made through what's called injection molding. That's a process where you have to make this kind of steel or metal mold, and you blow hot plastic into it, and then it sets, and then that happens very quickly, and you can make hundreds of thousands of parts, but they're all going to be the same parts, and that actual equipment to make the part is pretty expensive. With 3D printing, all you need is a computer and a design, and then you can press print, and you have it kind of at your hands after it finishes printing.
Yes.
So that's really exciting for PE teachers and students, and to really make the opportunity to make things customized for their own classes to make learning more efficient.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that really grabs me about this, the whole personalization angle. And I mean in the blog post that I mentioned earlier on that went out in March, I sort of mentioned the whole ability to customize things to suit the student that is there in that particular point in time, and that's really powerful. And I've got countless examples of students using equipment at our school that doesn't suit them, and it might only be applicable to half the group in terms of their size and so many other factors. And that for me is the thing that really excites me. The other thing that really that I find fascinating is, and this may be sort of further down the track, but the whole ability to be able to potentially print things on site that are more complex than what we can sort of do right now is, and what I'm thinking in this area is, the ability to print things like that have multiple different components that sort of make them up, not just one material. Is that something that's likely to happen, down the future?
I think it will definitely happen down the future. I think at the moment it's not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Actually, printing in multiple materials is still fairly challenging if you want anything that is pretty robust, that would probably withstand the tumble of kids and using it. But I think it will happen as materials and machines mature. It's one of those technologies that it kind of stagnated for those kind of 15, 20 years just doing prototyping. But when all these new machines came out, there's a big drive for innovation and push that people see the potential and want to take advantage. It's just going to take a little bit of time for the research to catch up and getting that into into kind of mass production and things like that. But going back to kind of the customized aspect of it, I've worked on a few projects where kind of as you were talking about, thinking about PE classes with kids of all different sizes and everyone's growing at different rates and things like that. So even equipment that's designed for kids may not optimally fit them. Yeah. Some kids could be bigger, some kids could be smaller. It made me think of this this project I worked on or was familiar with at the Sports Technology Institute, was working with Paralympic athletes. And this may be kind of the extreme of where you need something highly customized, just due to the way someone's kind of built and what their skeletal structure is, or from an injury. But this is already going on with those athletes, where we've made customized wheelchair or kind of wheelchair basketball frames for them, and even for some tennis athletes that had some issues with grips. They couldn't get their full hand around the tennis racket because of an injury they had sustained. They were just duct taping their hand to the racket so they could hold on to it. So that wasn't very efficient and obviously painful at the end.
Yeah, definitely.
But with 3D printing, you're able to create products through design by scanning the hand and scanning the racket, and you have kind of this digital shape where you can mold a grip or make a grip that you can print and have it ready to go for that athlete. It makes it so much easier for them to participate, not only enjoy the sport, but perform at a level that they're happy with.
Yeah, I mean, that in itself is another reason why it has massive implications for phys ed in the future, with adapted physical education being something that is a whole other area in PE, and sort of working with people who have disabilities and supporting them. I mean, it's always a challenge, and 3D printing sounds like it has an ability to sort of address that in many ways. So that's really exciting from PE teachers' perspectives. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is cost saving. Is it likely that eventually, as sort of the demand increases and innovation sort of pushes things forward, that things could become more affordable to print and produce because of the 3D printers?
Yeah, that's definitely a track that it's progressing towards this goal. Not quite there yet, but I think in certain cases, I could imagine specific to PE would be times when you have to make replacement parts rather than like things break all the time, whether you're in a manufacturing floor or in the classroom, and it's time consuming and costly to reorder stuff, and you end up having to repair it either to not optimal way. But in this case, the nice thing about 3D printing is as long as you have a 3D design, you can print it. So in theory, if a piece of equipment or a fairly small piece of equipment breaks and you just need one, you don't need a whole classroom set of 30 or 40. That's a kind of a perfect application of 3D printing where you're just looking to fill one or two at a time. It's a really nice option to have, and as long as kind of the materials match up and things like that. But I think that's really exciting, and it's one of those things where at least in the U.S. schools tend to be kind of strapped for funds and in some cases. So this is it can be a much more cost-efficient way of, rather than buying kind of a full replacement set, you can kind of replace things one at a time and a little bit cheaper way.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely appeals to me. And I mean, as I mentioned, my first 3D printing sort of experience was just the other day. We've only just got a 3D printer at our school, one of the desktop sort of variety. And the total cost for the whistle that I ended up actually using in class the very next period was 33 cents. And I mean, I couldn't buy a whistle for that amount, and it sort of does, definitely put a tick in the box towards that cost saving factor. And the fact that I could actually customize my whistle with my own logo on it, which is what I eventually did, was really exciting. And I've actually seen a whole host of PE teachers since then printing these whistles, which is really sort of tokenistic, but just definitely points towards that sort of future stuff. What I also wanted to talk about was this whole leveling of, bringing down the capacity that students need, or everyone needs, to be able to design some of these sort of things that can be printed. Many years ago, I'm assuming there was sort of more sophisticated tools that you needed software-wise and some sort of training. But, the other day I had my students download Tinkercad, which is an in-browser sort of 3D modeling tool, and they were able to instantly design and print, very simple things. But that's obviously progressing as well.
Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of free and simplified 3D design or CAD design software platforms out on the market, and some of them are open source, and there's lots of communities around that are interested in the technology that kind of have developed tutorials and things like that. And
see, that's exciting for education too, outside of just PE. Like, I know that our school has a limited budget for software and the ability to get access to open source or stuff that runs in a browser, and be able to experiment and use this stuff is sort of really appealing. And that remix culture that exists in 3D printing, is that just going to continue?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's going to be there already is kind of the maker and hacker culture that's existing, and people are really exciting, and outside of even 3D printing, there's a lot of work going on in creating some kind of, there's spaces even in Chicago that are called maker spaces, where it's kind of a band of people that are really interested in making physical products. So they've kind of come together to get a warehouse, and they have different machines, 3D printers, 3D scanners, sewing machines, everything you can imagine, and kind of donated in a very communal way, that people want to work on their projects or their hobbies and can build stuff. So I think that mentality is permeating through the U.S., and I've done some work in the U.K. on that same thing, and I imagine it's still going on in Australia as well, and around the globe, that like it's this idea that these manufacturing tools are becoming way more accessible to the masses. They're not just stuck behind the the doors of Ford or GE or something like that. So they're available, and people just take, whether you're 10 years old or 30 years old or 6 years old. I've tend to see in people that are kind of building these things, there's a lot of pride that goes into, hey, I made this. Like, this is something that I designed, I printed, or I built, or I carved. Like, there's a lot of pride there, and it gives people a different understanding and appreciation, and even interest in how something, even like a piece of sports equipment, is made. I mean, I've literally had to hand make baseball bats when I worked for a baseball equipment manufacturer, and it gave me a completely new understanding of how they're actually made. So I could see that being an interesting way to teach sports or teach PE, where you're not only giving people the rules and kind of letting them kind of experiment with the games and their athletic ability, but saying like, hey, like, this is how the first baseball bat or cricket bat was developed, and they can actually go out and do it to see how easy or difficult that may be. So I think it just gives people a new perspective, a little bit more context of where they're coming from, and with at least the equipment side of things.
I mean, and there's a really big that what you've just sort of mentioned then hits onto my probably one of the most exciting points for me, is that whole ability for students to inquire, be really inquisitive into the process of design and how that really impacts the performance. And if you're teaching anything for a teacher perspective, like biomechanics and I mean even sort of functional anatomy type concepts, and they can really get a hands-on sort of experience of designing something and seeing how it impacts on the potential performance. And I mean, in a school context, that really sort of brings together other subject areas. So there could be these sort of collaborative projects with people in design and tech classes working together to build things for PE. And I mean, that's really exciting. And I know that there's some people that are doing some really exciting stuff in schools at the moment, and I only expect that it's probably likely to continue. Is schools sort of like a growing area for 3D design and sort of 3D printing, do you think?
Yeah, I've talked to or I've seen a lot of printers go up in schools, and at least the tools for designing being taught. It's one of those things where it brings a level of excitement. People gets people excited if you get a 3D printer into the school or the classroom, and like you were saying, it really hits a wide variety of topics, from science and engineering to design and art to PE. So like it has the ability to bring this kind of cross collaboration or cross kind of discipline education together, and that's happening in companies too. It's just not in schools, where a lot of companies don't function like that. It's kind of very siloed off, where you have the design team, you have the business team, you have the engineering team, you have the manufacturing team, all kind of working in silos. But because 3D printing is unique in the sense that it can do a lot of manufacturing fairly quickly, in terms of kind of condensing the timeline for how a part is built, like it's forcing these groups that otherwise may not have worked together as closely, really together. So I think in schools it's very, very similar, and it'll be exciting to see how that grows, and kind of developing. Like I was never exposed to 3D printing when I was in grade school at all, but it'll be exciting to see like some of the kids growing up now who have this exposure, and probably after a few practices can be a better designer than me on some of these software tools. Like what happens to them as they start to go into college and go into the professional world, where it's like expected that you have a 3D printing machine to use. So it just opens the door,
even more,
kind of kicks the door open to see what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, that's without a doubt. Well, I mean, really thank you for your time today. And just to finish off, is there anything that you're excited about in terms of things that maybe you're working on, or even outside of the 3D printing space in that sort of sport and technology area that may have some implications for people in schools or just in sport in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, there's a lot going on. I think in addition to 3D printing, sports wearables is a really exciting space. I'm doing some work there to bring the idea of sensors to equipment so that people can see how fast they're swinging or how fast they're throwing a ball and things like that. So that's at the moment really being used for top level athletes.
Yeah.
But I think there's just as much opportunity at the lower ages as well, because it's a different mentality. It may not necessarily be for measuring performance, which is interesting, but it's also one of those things where it's kind of a platform to create community and create competition if you're able to share your statistics with someone else in your city or in your state or in your country, or even compare those. So I would keep an eye out in the sports wearable space.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that you can see that there's so many devices that are starting to appear in that general setting, and I'm really excited to see where that wearable stuff sort of heads up, because it just seems like it's just the tip of the iceberg in what's possible, and yeah, really excited by that.
Definitely.
Well, yeah, thank you heaps for deciding to come onto the podcast today and sharing everything you know about 3D printing and its sort of implications in the physical education space. Where can people find out more about you if they want to do so?
Sure. My website is called 3dprintingreports.com, and has a little bit about the work I do and some videos about the sports-specific work that I've done as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also follow me on Twitter. I have 2 Twitter accounts. One is for the 3D printing specific stuff, at 3D Reports, and then I also do a podcast on sports technology. Been doing that for a few years, so this is almost a kind of a cross-pollination of podcasts here.
It is too.
So that's called the Sports Technology. It's called www.sportstechnologypodcast.com. Twitter on that is @SportsTechPod for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the links and everything to the show will be at the PEGeek.com, and you could be able to go there and find all those links that have been mentioned in today's episode. Just want to thank you again for taking the time, really early morning for you as well, which is really appreciated. But I definitely know that everyone listening has got a lot out of it, so thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Bye, mate.
Thanks.
All right, I really hope you enjoyed today's episode with Mike Vasquez and the sort of implications that 3D printing has surrounding the physical education classrooms of the future. Now, if you'd like to get any of the notes and resources mentioned in today's episode, then you can head over to thepegeek.com/32, and you'll be able to find them all there, as well as social media links to Mike and his podcast. Now, on the next episode, number 33, we're going to be diving into different tools that you can use to support the sort of efficiency related to tracking student attendance, tracking behavior, and sort of communicating these things to your administration and also parents. There's a number of tools that I'm using and have played with and built myself to support this particular function, and I'm really excited to dedicate an entire episode to them. Until next time, if you have any questions, you know where to get me at jared@thepegeek.com, or you can leave a voicemail at thepegeek.com/voicemail. All right, see you later.